Have you ever wondered what true evil on four wheels looks like? Welcome to our deep dive into the riveting world of Christine, the 1983 film adaptation of Stephen King's novel. We're about to uncover the jaw-dropping backstory of this possessed Plymouth Fury and how it turned into an icon of horror cinema. Buckle up, this ride's about to get wild. 10. The forgotten CR that ignited a legend. One of the most fascinating aspects about Christine lies in Stephen King's deliberate choice of the 1958 Plymouth Fury as his novel's titular antagonist. At the time King was writing, he looked at the colorful palette of 1950s automobiles, Chevrolets, Cadillacs, and Thunderbirds, yet he wanted something that felt overshadowed or nearly erased from collective memory. Enter the Plymouth Fury, a car initially produced as a performance-oriented limited edition, whose name and presence had waned by the 1970s. This backstory instantly sparked King's creativity. In his eyes, the Fury had slipped under society's radar, giving it an almost eerie mystique. Few people in 1983 could recall it vividly, and that anonymity added a chilling undercurrent to a story about a supernatural automobile. By choosing a model that was never as famous as its Chevy or Ford contemporaries, King allowed his readers, and later, the film's audience, to experience a sense of discovery. Imagine stumbling upon an old, neglected relic in a junkyard and realizing that this rundown hunk of metal once embodied the opulent spirit of 1950s Americana. The Fury's obscurity gave King a blank canvas upon which to project malevolence. If he had selected, say, a well-known classic like a '57 Chevy Bel Air, many viewers and readers would bring preconceived notions about that iconic car. With the Fury, however, King could reshape it from the ground up, molding its identity into the stuff of nightmares. When John Carpenter brought Christine to the big screen, the film magnified that aura of mystery. The car's distinctive tail fins and broad chrome grille contrasted starkly against a modern backdrop. Audiences in the early 1980s found themselves gazing at a design that was both vaguely familiar yet oddly alien. That disconnect helped the vehicle itself become a star. No one had overexposed the Fury in 100 other productions, so it felt like Christine was emerging from the shadows in all her red and white glory for the first time. The film, inadvertently, breathed new life into the Plymouth Fury's historical standing. Car enthusiasts and horror fans alike became enchanted by its sleek lines and lethal persona. Before long, replicas and restorations popped up, with people clamoring to own a piece of King's horrifying vision. Thus, a car once on the verge of fading into oblivion achieved cult status, inseparable from the identity of a demonic machine that kills with neither hesitation nor remorse. In the end, Stephen King's quest for the forgotten vehicle not only resurrected the Plymouth Fury but also carved its monstrous likeness into pop culture legend. Filming before the ink dried, the 1980s exploded with King mania. Stephen King's books soared off shelves, and Hollywood studios battled fiercely for adaptation rights. So, when word leaked that King was crafting a story about a malevolent car, movie producers practically sprinted to secure a deal. Columbia Pictures emerged victorious, snatching the rights to Christine even as King was still polishing his final chapters. This decision was both bold and a touch risky. Imagine greenlighting a film before the general public had any clue what twists and turns this monstrous Plymouth Fury might take. What fueled such frenzy? Simple: King's track record. By the early 1980s, cinematic hits like Carrie, The Shining, and The Dead Zone had already shown that Stephen King's name on a marquee could mobilize legions of horror fans. And producers knew the author had a knack for weaving terror out of everyday elements, like telekinetic teenagers, haunted hotels, and now, an evil car. It was a can't-miss prospect in an era when slashers, haunted houses, and paranormal chills were dominating the horror scene. John Carpenter stepped in as director, but not without a twist in his own career arc. Initially, he was eyeing another King project, Firestarter. That didn't pan out, leaving Carpenter open to helm Christine. The decision was practically cosmic alignment. Carpenter was already revered in horror circles for Halloween and The Thing. He had a penchant for transforming ordinary settings, like a sleepy Midwestern town, into nerve-shattering landscapes of dread. With Christine, Carpenter transferred that approach onto a 1950s automobile, turning what might have been a campy premise into a tension-fueled narrative. In December 1983, just months after the novel's publication in April of that same year, Christine rolled onto the silver screen. The pacing was almost surreal. In less than a year, fans could read the story and then witness it reimagined by a master horror filmmaker. While risky, this scheduling also created a unique synergy. Readers who rushed through King's pages clamored to see how closely the film would mirror the novel's spectral undertones. Conversely, moviegoers who hadn't cracked the book's spine left theaters curious about the original text. This, before the ink-dried production approach also opened a doorway for deviations. Because the novel and screenplay were nearly simultaneous creations, Carpenter's vision took shape as King's words were still fresh, granting the director license to integrate his signature style. The result was a film that stood confidently on its own, even as it bowed to the source material's core horror. Columbia Pictures' gamble, to lock in production before the novel's official release, paid off, preserving a uniquely synchronized burst of creativity that remains a fascinating episode in Hollywood adaptation history. Casting choices that sparked magic bringing Christine to life called for a very specific ensemble. You needed someone who could portray the quietly nerdy Arnie Cunningham, an unsuspecting misfit who transforms into a brooding, vengeful figure under Christine's sinister influence. Casting Keith Gordon for Arnie proved a masterstroke. Gordon was no stranger to cinematic tension. At age 16, he appeared in Jaws 2. By the time Christine went into production, set in 1978, ironically the year Jaws 2 was filmed, Keith Gordon had the perfect mix of youthful awkwardness and dramatic potential to capture Arnie's two-sided personality. Intriguingly, producers considered other promising names, such as Scott Baio, but rejected them for seeming too naturally confident. The essence of Arnie is that he's timid and overshadowed by bullies, parents, and teenage hierarchies, until Christine empowers him with dangerous self-assurance. Gordon embodied that subtle shift from meek to menacing, ensuring the audience felt equal parts sympathy and dread as Arnie spiraled deeper into obsession. Then there's Lee, the love interest who grows alarmed by Arnie's increasing attachment to that rusted Plymouth Fury. Brooke Shields nearly snagged the role, but Alexandra Paul ultimately took the reins, and with it, she delivered a performance that balanced vulnerability and resolve. She had to convince viewers that Lee was genuinely in love with Arnie, and also realistically terrified by Christine's baleful grip on him. Alexandra Paul's subsequent fame with Baywatch might overshadow her earlier roles, but in Christine, she proved she could hold her own in a horror context, especially when pitted against a supernatural foe on four wheels. And let's not forget Kevin Bacon's near involvement as Dennis, Arnie's loyal buddy. Had Bacon not turned to Footloose, which catapulted him to stardom, we might have seen a vastly different dynamic. Instead, John Stockwell stepped in, exuding a relaxed, jock-like charm that meshed well with Arnie's geekiness, making their on-screen friendship believable. Dennis needed to be the stable, relatable contrast to Arnie's unraveling psyche, and Stockwell's portrayal did exactly that. Director John Carpenter was adamant about not overloading the film with big-name stars. He wanted relative newcomers to infuse the story with authenticity. This approach, so different from the trend of stuffing a movie with established talent, helped Christine connect with everyday audiences. Teens and adults alike could see these unassuming faces and sense a closeness to the high school experience, minus the malevolent car, hopefully. The synergy between Gordon, Paul, and Stockwell anchored the film in a relatable emotional core, despite the outlandish premise of a demonic car. In horror, authenticity of character is key. If the audience doesn't buy the people, they certainly won't buy the phantom Plymouth Fury. Carpenter's instincts in casting ensured that Christine would captivate viewers with an offbeat but compelling ensemble, weaving together youthful energy, innocent ambition, and a creeping dread that explodes once Christine's engine roars to life. The R-rating debate by the early 1980s, the Motion Picture Association's rating system had become a battlefield for filmmakers trying to hit the perfect audience sweet spot. Typically, directors like Steven Spielberg had to tone down violence or remove graphic content to dodge harsh ratings. John Carpenter, known for Halloween and The Thing, faced the opposite struggle with Christine. The studio wanted an R rating to appeal to a hip teenage crowd, but the film itself wasn't gory enough to guarantee that classification. Paradoxically, Christine is far more about psychological tension and supernatural dread than explicit carnage. The story hinges on the eerie idea of a car silently tracking you down, headlights slicing through darkness, engine humming like a hungry predator. Unlike The Thing, which showcased jaw-dropping gore and grotesque transformations, Christine kills off its victims with comparatively minimal bloodshed. Often, we see the car's vengeance in quick, furious moments, a terrified victim trapped in an alleyway or run off a darkened road. There's little time to linger on the gore because Christine herself is the spectacle, her unstoppable presence, the squeal of tires, and that spine-chilling, self-repairing ability. Given that the film wasn't drenched in blood, Carpenter had to ramp up another element to secure the R rating, rough language. Yes, in a strange twist of Hollywood economics, peppering the script with profanities was a surefire ticket to an R label. Studio executives believed that an R rating would make the film more alluring to the teenagers and young adults who flocked to midnight horror screenings, craving something edgy and forbidden. They didn't want Christine to be dismissed as a lukewarm thriller, slapped with a PG or PG-13. The PG-13 rating came into play in 1984, but the principle was similar. They needed the audience to believe it was a serious horror flick from the director who created Michael Myers and battled alien shapeshifters in Antarctica. Carpenter complied, injecting coarse dialogue and a few sharp-tongued exchanges. The characters openly mock, insult, and threaten each other in ways that resonate with teenage angst, matching the rebellious streak that Christine herself seems to embody. This language choice also aligns with the movie's exploration of adolescence gone wrong. Arnie's metamorphosis from bullied introvert to foul-mouthed, leather jacket-wearing terror underscores how Christine corrupts not just his actions but also his spirit. Looking back, the irony stands out. The man who brought us some of the goriest scenes in horror cinema with The Thing had to insert more cursing just to earn an R rating for a film that's fairly restrained in terms of on-screen violence. Regardless, the rating served its purpose, giving Christine an edgy reputation among 1980s horror releases. Audiences came expecting a bloody thrill ride. Instead, they encountered an unnerving tale about obsession, isolation, and a mysterious car that simply wouldn't die. And in its own unique way, that tension, rather than overt gore, made Christine an enduring entry in Carpenter's filmography. Initial disappointment for King and Carpenter. It might be shocking to learn that Christine, now celebrated as a cult horror classic, was initially dismissed as a box office letdown. Stephen King and John Carpenter both had high hopes. King's novels were consistently topping bestseller lists, and Carpenter's reputation as a horror maestro meant that combining their talents should yield a runaway smash. But when Christine premiered in December 1983, it only generated around $21 million domestically. For perspective, Halloween, 1978, and The Shining, 1980, had cast long shadows, and many expected Christine to at least match or exceed those phenomena. Yet, audiences and critics seemed lukewarm at best. Some found the premise too far-fetched. An evil car sounds like a Twilight Zone oddity rather than a full-feature horror film. Meanwhile, the teenage horror genre was in flux. Halloween had established the slow burn, suspense-driven style in 1978, emphasizing creepy ambience over graphic bloodshed. By the time Christine rolled around, younger horror fans were gravitating toward more visceral experiences, culminating in 1984's A Nightmare on Elm Street, which injected surreal imagery in buckets of gore. Christine felt caught in a transitional gap. It wasn't a pure slasher film, nor was it as psychologically oppressive as some other King adaptations, think Carrie or The Shining. It was, in many ways, a character-driven story about obsession. Stephen King expressed disappointment in the film's financial performance. While the novel soared in readership, selling briskly on King's name alone, the cinematic version didn't ride the wave of euphoria that typically followed a King adaptation. John Carpenter similarly felt disheartened. Coming off the brutally negative reception of The Thing in 1982, which, ironically, is now hailed as a masterpiece, Carpenter hoped Christine might re-establish him commercially. The box office returns, however, didn't reach the heights needed to label it a triumph. But as the 1980s turned into the 1990s, something curious happened. Home video rentals and late-night TV broadcasts gave Christine a second life. Horror aficionados started appreciating its moody soundtrack, courtesy of Carpenter himself, and its stylish cinematography. Fans were drawn to Arnie's chilling transformation and the way Christine seemingly heals her own dents and scratches. The film gained traction at conventions, midnight screenings, and horror festivals, transforming from a so-called flop into a revered cult gem. These days, Christine is beloved for its blend of 1950s nostalgia and supernatural terror. Enthusiasts can't get enough of the iconic Plymouth Fury's menacing rev, that symbolic red and white exterior representing both teenage rebellion and unstoppable evil. In hindsight, one might argue that Christine was ahead of its time. It offered a horror story steeped in emotional complexity and societal commentary, rather than cheap shocks. King and Carpenter may have felt let down in 1983, but history has vindicated their creative partnership, bestowing upon Christine the cult status it undeniably deserves. The mystery of blacked-out windows in many horror films, shadows play an essential role. They obscure malevolent forces and amplify our deepest fears. Christine took this principle to a literal level by blacking out the windows of the Plymouth Fury whenever the car was on the prowl. This seemingly small detail enriched the film's sense of menace, giving the impression that Christine might be driving herself, or, if Arnie was indeed at the wheel, we were never entirely certain. That uncertainty created an unsettling dynamic. Was the car just an extension of Arnie's will, or was it independently orchestrating its own bloody vendettas? One practical explanation is that the stunt drivers needed camouflage. On set, professionals executed Christine's aggressive moves, so blackened windows hid them from the camera's gaze. Yet the aesthetic effect went far deeper. Imagine the car barreling down a dimly lit street, no driver visible, headlights like glaring eyes, the reflection of streetlights bouncing off tinted glass. This visual turned the Plymouth Fury into a predator. We're not merely afraid of Arnie's rage but of the car itself, seemingly alive and malevolent. For a story about a demonic automobile, there's no better way to say, this machine has its own mind, than to erase any sign of human control from the audience's view. Some viewers interpret the blacked-out windows as a symbol of Arnie's internal corruption. The deeper he falls under Christine's spell, the more opaque he becomes emotionally. The audience can't see through to Arnie's humanity, just as they can't see into the car's interior. At times, Christine's unstoppable hunts feel less like Arnie's revenge and more like the car's primal aggression. This question, who or what is truly in control, fuels the film's tension. We watch from the outside, guessing whether Arnie is even present, or if Christine is perfectly capable of prowling the night on her own. The tinted windows also bolster the movie's psychological horror aspect. The kill scenes are often swift and somewhat off-camera, leaving the grisly details to our imagination. We might witness headlights illuminating a victim's terrified face or the shriek of twisting metal. The driver's seat remains cloaked in darkness. This approach parallels older horror conventions, where suggestion trumps explicit visualization. It's reminiscent of how classic monster movies teased a clawed silhouette rather than showing the creature in stark light. Indeed, Christine's shadowy silhouette cruising lonely roads conjures existential dread. We see a reflection of our darkest impulses, unstoppable once unleashed. The blacked-out windows serve as a cunning cinematic technique, hiding the line between man and machine, shifting the film's perspective from Arnie commanding Christine to Christine commanding Arnie. Those tinted windows are a window into the movie's soul, so to speak, offering just enough mystery to keep us on edge. And it works, elevating Christine from a run-of-the-mill ghost story on wheels to a layered meditation on how evil can consume us from the inside out. Deleted scenes that could have changed everything. Every filmmaker faces tough decisions when cutting a movie. John Carpenter was no exception, and Christine had its share of scenes left on the proverbial cutting room floor. Two of the most discussed deletions revolve around the characters' relationships, moments that, if retained, might have drastically altered the audience's perception of key friendships and motives. First is the scene where Dennis and Lee meet secretly at a drive-in burger joint. The snippet shows them confessing they wished they'd met each other first, rather than both connecting through Arnie. In a startling turn, they share an impulsive kiss. Cue an ominous hush as Christine suddenly appears in the background, prowling like a jealous lover. Arnie, presumably behind the wheel, engages in a frightening show of intimidation by trying to ram into Dennis's car. The tension is electric. Lee and Dennis realize their betrayal is not only emotional but might invoke the fury, quite literally, of a sentient vehicle. Had Carpenter left this sequence in, Dennis and Lee would come off as far more duplicitous. Instead of purely concerned friends trying to save Arnie from evil, they'd also be guilty of stealing emotional satisfaction behind his back. This moral gray area might compromise their heroic stance later on. Audiences tend to rally behind characters who genuinely want to rescue a friend from doom. If said characters are also crossing lines, viewers might lose sympathy for them. The second deleted scene is a lengthier sequence of Dennis riding shotgun with Arnie on New Year's Eve. Arnie speeds recklessly through city streets, and Dennis is on the verge of vomiting from terror. Then comes one of the strangest lines, "Don't get any on the seat." She hates that. That one sentence implies a broader history. Evidently, Christine has been used in multiple frightening joyrides before. Perhaps others have succumbed to car sickness, and Christine's malevolent personality extends even to trifling bodily fluids. The comedic horror of the moment underscores Arnie's full descent into mania. He's more concerned about Christine's preferences than the safety of his best friend. The absence of these scenes tightens the film's narrative focus. Christine in its final form showcases Arnie's transformation from bullied teen to possessed sociopath without complicating side plots that question the loyalty of Dennis and Lee. Still, these deleted sequences paint a curious, what-if scenario, a deeper moral complexity, more explicit glimpses of Christine's bizarre sentience, and a love triangle of sorts fueled by dark obsession. While fascinating, Carpenter presumably chose to streamline the story for maximum impact. Sometimes less is more, especially when the central terror involves a supernatural vehicle with a vicious streak. Those extra details might have diluted the tension or shifted the focus away from the chilling bond between Arnie and Christine, which forms the beating heart of the film. In the end, these deleted moments remain a tantalizing footnote, reminders that every horror film carries secrets fans will forever be eager to see. Darnell's fate, on-page versus on-screen. In the cinematic adaptation of Christine, Mr. Darnell, the gruff garage owner who rents space to Arnie, meets a grim but relatively swift end. He sits in a burned-out Christine, and the car's seat inexorably crushes him, leaving viewers with a sense of immediate shock. It's a ghastly moment, but quickly over. However, in Stephen King's novel, that fate is dialed up to extreme levels of brutality, offering a more disturbing window into Christine's merciless power. On the page, Darnell is not just a foul-mouthed mechanic but also someone who manipulates Arnie for illicit errands, smuggling and shady dealings. Christine's retribution, when it arrives, is downright horrifying. She crashes straight through the front of his home, corners him on the stairway, and runs him down multiple times. It's not a swift demise, it's a prolonged assault that underscores Christine's capacity for relentless, sadistic violence. The difference between the two versions is stark. Film Darnell's demise, while grotesque, is relatively contained and borderline off-screen. Novel Darnell experiences a drawn-out death that reveals a monstrous side to Christine's wrath, leaving a vivid impression of unstoppable, visceral brutality. Why dial it back for the movie? One obvious reason is the rating issue. Had Carpenter staged a prolonged hit-and-run inside a house, it might have veered the film into truly gory territory, overshadowing the psychological facets that make Christine unique. Moreover, 1980s audiences were already grappling with the shift in horror standards. Too much gore might have pigeonholed Christine as pure schlock, rather than the moody exploration of possession and obsession that Carpenter seemed to aim for. The disparity also illustrates broader differences in storytelling mediums. The novel unfolds at a measured pace, giving King room to detail the relentless winter storms, the emotional meltdown of Arnie, and Christine's cunning escalation of violence. The film, on the other hand, runs under 2 hours, demanding narrative economy. Carpenter likely felt that a single shocking moment could suffice to convey Darnell's doom without devoting a lengthy set piece to it. The shorter scene also amplifies Christine's unpredictability. You never know how swiftly or lethally she'll strike. Interestingly, Darnell isn't the only character whose literary demise diverges from the cinematic version. In King's text, Arnie and his mother perish in a random traffic accident, while Christine disappears on a destructive rampage, leaving the possibility that she'll strike again. The film changes that ending, offering a more conclusive confrontation, yet another testament to how King's intricately woven narrative had to be streamlined for Hollywood. Ultimately, Darnell's Fate, either version, serves the same purpose, to demonstrate Christine's willingness to eliminate anyone who endangers her relationship with Arnie. Whether it's a crushing seat in the movie or repeated run-overs in the book, the lesson is chillingly identical. Christine demands unwavering devotion and reacts with ferocious vengeance against those who would exploit or stand against her. The difference in medium merely affects the degree and detail of the horror she inflicts. A haunting connection to Halloween. It's no coincidence that Christine exudes a quietly unsettling atmosphere reminiscent of John Carpenter's Halloween. Both films share more than just their director, they radiate an undercurrent of relentless evil manifesting in a seemingly indestructible form. In Halloween, Michael Myers is the faceless embodiment of homicidal obsession. He seldom speaks, he just stalks and kills, as if controlled by a dark compulsion. Likewise, Christine is a literal embodiment of lethal intent, wordlessly cruising the streets and disposing of those who cross her path. Curiously, Christine and Halloween share the same year. Carpenter's 1978 classic was set and released that year, while Christine takes place in 1978, though it was filmed and released in 1983. Some fans enjoy weaving fan theories about these parallels, imagining that Michael Myers and Christine exist in the same cinematic universe. It's a playful notion. In one suburban town lurks a masked serial killer, and in another, a demonic car prowls the streets. Both arrive without much explanation, embodying a primal, unexplained force. Carpenter often refers to Michael Myers as the Shape, highlighting his function as pure evil. With Christine, she's not even human, just steel, chrome, and unstoppable malice. On a technical level, Carpenter's minimalist approach to music threads these films together. The repetitive, synth-driven score from Halloween is iconic, unsettling in its simplicity. Christine also uses a distinctive score, though balanced with period rock and roll tracks that Christine selects to convey her moods. There's a sense that Carpenter's signature style involves letting silence linger just long enough to disturb the audience, then punctuating the scene with an abrupt musical stinger. This technique keeps viewers in a state of heightened anticipation. You never know when the tranquil quiet will erupt into chaos, whether it's Michael Myers stepping from the shadows or Christine revving her engine for a final, deadly charge. Both films shy away from extreme gore. While Halloween launched the slasher genre, it's relatively restrained in graphic violence compared to later entries like Friday the 13th. Carpenter chose suspense over explicit carnage. Similarly, Christine rarely shows lingering close-ups of mutilation. The kills often happen swiftly and in near darkness, leaving the specifics to the imagination. That approach intensifies the mystery. We're left pondering what sort of malevolence can drive a person, or a car, to such extremes. Lastly, there's the recurring theme of unstoppable aggression. Michael Myers is famously unkillable. Bullets, stabbings, and falls never truly halt his pursuit. Christine, too, can regenerate herself, forging a chilling link between these two unstoppable evils. Each confrontation with the heroes feels like just a momentary triumph, never a permanent victory. That sense of doom resonates through Carpenter's filmography. In Halloween, Dr. Loomis warns that Michael is nothing less than the embodiment of evil. In Christine, the car's existence defies logical explanation. It's as if Carpenter is reminding us that certain forms of darkness can't be reasoned with or permanently destroyed, they can only be temporarily subdued. And that, perhaps, is the scariest similarity of all. Departures from the original novel. No adaptation ever transplants a novel to film without changes, and Christine is no exception. Stephen King's book reveals a layered backstory. Christine is possessed by the malevolent spirit of her former owner, Roland Liebe. Arnie doesn't merely fall under the car's influence, he's literally haunted by Liebe's ghost. Scenes show the undead specter riding shotgun, talking to Arnie, pushing him deeper into a macabre union with the car. King's storyline is brimming with poltergeist-like activity, where Arnie's physical and mental transformation is partly explained by being overshadowed by Liebe's presence. In Carpenter's version, Christine is evil right from the start, no haunting needed. The movie opens with a bizarre factory scene where the car seemingly injures an assembly worker. This moment frames Christine herself as the source of all malevolence, independent of any human spirit. Arnie's subsequent corruption feels more like a psychological enthrallment than a literal possession by Libby. This shift profoundly changes the thematic texture. In the book, one could argue that Arnie is partly a victim of Libby's spirit. In the film, it's possible Arnie's own dark side is awakened by Christine's primal nature, an amalgam of teenage angst, the lure of independence, and raw, supernatural malevolence. Another major alteration involves the ending. King's novel leaves the door open for Christine to continue terrorizing unsuspecting victims. She disappears into the night, unstoppable as ever, and Arnie meets a tragic fate in an unrelated car accident. His mother also dies. The novel's final notes are drenched in fatalism and gloom, reinforcing the idea that Christine's hunger for destruction carries on, free of mortal constraints. Carpenter opted for a more definitive climax. Christine is seemingly crushed into a cube in a junkyard. While the film does hint at the possibility she might still be alive, an iconic twitch of a piece of metal in the final shot, it feels more conclusive. You get the sense that the heroes have triumphed, even if the victory isn't entirely guaranteed. Why such deviations? Partly, it's about cinematic pacing and audience expectations. Tethering Christine's evil to a single ghost might have felt repetitive of other horror tropes. For instance, An American Werewolf in London features a protagonist conversing with a deceased friend's spirit. Carpenter embraced ambiguity. Is Christine possessed by some demonic entity, or is she simply a mechanical beast with a mind of her own? That open-ended question lingers in the movie, evoking deeper anxieties about technology and the lengths to which humans will go to satisfy their obsessions. Finally, by removing Libby's ghost, Carpenter sharpened the allegory of teenage rebellion. Arnie is the underdog who gets a taste of power, and that power corrupts him thoroughly. Christine becomes the ultimate teenage dream turned nightmare, a killer car that grants social standing, rebellious flair, and a sense of control, but at the cost of personal morality and human connections. These refinements didn't please every King purist, but they carved out Christine's place as a cinematic entity with its own brand of heartbreak, error, and unstoppable horsepower. You've now seen the hidden layers fueling Christine's enduring myth, from its original, forgotten car heritage to its bone-chilling similarities with Halloween. If you found this journey enthralling, don't let it end here. Go ahead and hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, subscribe for more deep dive movie explorations, and share this video with every horror fan you know. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road, and beware what might be following you in the rearview mirror.